Hi, and welcome back to another episode of The Breakdown with Bethany. I'm Bethany Braun Silva, and today my guest is Tara Clark. Tara is the founder and creator of the wildly successful community Modern Mom Probs. We're going to be talking about all things social media, how Tara served her audience over the last 10 years with incredible, funny content, and of course, all the trials and tribulations that come with running a brand. You're definitely going to want to check this one out.
So I got started on Instagram in 2016, and that's around the time that Canva came out. So I always joke that there was like a shiny new website, which is Canva, and obviously everyone knows and uses Canva now, but back in 2016 it was new. And so I was using that just as I was starting on Instagram, and it all sort of like came up together.
Did the Instagram, so we'll also do like a background on
Sure.
on you. And I mean, I'm so impressed by your, running, you ran, Nickelodeon socials, like, is that right?
Yeah. So we'll totally backtrack. So I've
Yeah.
been in the social media world now for over 10 years. I worked in I worked at Nickelodeon, started in 2007, and I worked underneath. I was the assistant to the head of digital. His name is Stephen Youngwood. Now he currently runs Sesame Street. He's the CEO of Sesame Street. Um, he's a wonderful person. And so I worked as his assistant for several years. And then I wanted to break free from the assistant role. I was an EA. So I wanted to break free from being an executive assistant. And then I started on the digital marketing team, and social media is rolled underneath that. And so during that time, I headed up Nick Jr. and Nick at Night properties. So not the Nickelodeon properties themselves, but Nick Jr., Nick at Night. So I always like to tell the story of I was Dora the Explorer on Facebook. And my mom used to like run around and tell everybody, like, oh, she's Dora, my daughter's Dora the Explorer. I was like, on Facebook, mommy, on Facebook, not like actually. So yeah, that was a great experience. But this was actually like even predating Instagram. Instagram existed because this was 2012, but we as Nickelodeon were not on it yet. So we primarily were on Twitter and Facebook.
Yeah,
And so
remember when there
then,
was only two platforms?
yes, and it was amazing. And like, I mean, that was like stressful enough as it was back then in 2012, but yeah, it's a different landscape now. And even it's funny. So like I said, I also did Nick at Night, and we had a show that came on. It was called Hollywood Heights. I think that's what it was, Hollywood Heights. And I remember live tweeting during that show, and like that used to be a thing. I feel like that doesn't even
Yeah.
really happen anymore, but
Might come back with Threads, who knows?
I know. I'm loving Threads because it's like full circle for me. That's why I love it. And I think when I complain about like, oh, having to be a content creator, I'm really talking about video. Like
Yeah.
I think video is so much work for such little return. And so when I saw that like Threads came out, I jumped at it. I could not wait to be on Threads again, or just on Threads period. And I couldn't wait to be writing short quippy one-liners, because that's how I got my start. That's literally where it all came from. So for that to come back around full circle made me so happy.
I think a lot of people are happy actually, because the pressure to create video, original video, new video, it's a lot. It's a lot to just like show up on camera.
Yes.
I feel that fiercely, like, every day. But
It's so much.
I wanted to talk because, you created Modern Mom Probs. This is like sort of like the premier destination for moms on social media who just like want to laugh and like feel like seen and all of that. And I know you mentioned your background at, with Nickelodeon, Nick at
Mhm.
Night and Nick Jr., but tell us how Modern Mom Probs got started.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, I was at Nickelodeon. My son was born at the end of 2012, and I decided to stay home with him full time. Actually, full disclosure, I wanted to go part time at Nickelodeon, and they said it's all or nothing. And so I said, okay, then it's going to be nothing.
Yeah.
And so I made a very hard decision to stay home with him full time, because living in New York City, there's a certain pressure that you feel to go back to work right away.
Yes, I
And
live in New York
I
City and feel that
know,
right.
that's why I'm saying that to you, like, I know you know. And so there was this pressure that I was like, well, of course, that's what I'm gonna do. That's what we all do here. That's what all of my peers have done. That's just sort of the I thought the expectation. And so it was a really challenging decision for me to say, you know what, the cost of childcare is through the roof. And I just decided financially it really wasn't worth it. And I wanted to spend time with my one and only child. So that's what I did. Okay. So then fast forward to early 2016. It was February of 2016. I had the idea of starting an Instagram account about parenting. And I remember distinctly telling my friends and family, I'm going to start an Instagram account about parenting and I'm going to monetize it. And they were like, what? What do you mean? And I was like, no, 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 it's going to be a thing. They're like, that's not a thing. That like actually it isn't a thing. You're just like making that up. And I was like, no, I'm not making it up. It's a thing. I'm going to make it a thing. And so I launched NYC Mom Probs, and I was talking about problems that are inherently New York City based. And I know you'll appreciate this, Bethany, because it's like taking your stroller down the subway stairs or on the bus or getting into private like nursery school, like all the different craziness that we deal with in New York City as parents. And so I had an account sort of making fun of that. Actually, at the time we were living in the Upper East Side, and there's the Upper East Side Moms Facebook group. And that is really what led me to want to start an account lampooning everything.
I need to see these I've probably followed you back then. It's not ringing a bell, obviously, because
But
I
it
have
was such a long time ago.
I gotta see these old ones because I'm sure I'm laughing right now because yes, I grew up in New York City when I was working retail, very pregnant with my first. My first was also born in 2012. And I remember on the Upper East Side, I was working retail and women would come in and be like, where's he going to preschool? I'm like, he's not out of my body yet. And they're like, oh well, and they would give me the look like, all right. I was
Good
like,
luck.
but that's New York City. It's wild. It's wild here.
I love that you had such a parallel experience. I know that this is a true story. We had signed my son up for daycare before he was born, which is
But
wild.
you were right on track as far as New York City is concerned. I was behind, but you did it. Yeah, you're right on track.
I did it. And so it happened to be across the street. We were actually very lucky. We lived at the time, we were on 96th in Lexington. And there was a preschool across the street that I could literally see the front door from my apartment building. And so, yeah, he went there for actually 18 months. So, I mean, I'm totally going off on a tangent now, but
No,
I was home for a while and he was still going to daycare. And then I got a job for a few months and I was like, you know what, this isn't for me. So I left that job. And so that was the story there. But yes, we had signed him up even before he was born.
there you go. And so tell me, how did NYC Mom Probs turn into Modern Mom Probs?
Excellent question. So at the end of 2016, we moved to the suburbs. And I had this existential crisis because I was like, I'm not an NYC mom now. And I had to think like, gosh, what is it? What am I going to do? And I knew I had to change the adjective. So I actually kept it for several months. I think I kept it. I can tell you exactly what it was. We moved in September and I changed it the following April 2017. So I was texting with my one friend Angela, who runs an account called Mommy Wine Time. It's a very funny account.
Yeah.
She actually never talks about drinking. That's what's kind of ironic about it too. It's like sort of an unfortunate name. Anyway, she and I were like throwing adjectives back and forth to each other. And she's like, how about this? And how about that? And how about that? And I was like, how about modern? And she's like, oh, I like it. And so then literally the next day, like flick of a switch, all of my stuff was changed. And then Modern Mom Probs was born. And so, like I said, that was April of 2017. So depending on who asks, sometimes I say I got started in 2016. And then sometimes I say I got started in 2017. And the account just took off from there, because when you have a regional thing like NYC Mom Probs, there's only a handful of people that are understanding the experience. When you say Modern Mom Probs, everyone's like, yeah, I have that. Sure. I drive a minivan. Yeah, that's an issue. I have social media addiction. Yeah, that's a problem. You know, like all of a sudden everyone comes out of the woodwork being like, yes, I have modern mom problems too.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the journey to monetize your social media? I mean, clearly it's like now it's so commonplace, but back then it really wasn't. And so I know that you weren't working full time at traditional 9 to 5, but this was obviously a job. So talk to us a little bit about that, because I know that's it's definitely not easy. I know that, but it's a nice option for moms, right? Like who maybe want to jump into that world.
Yes. And that's really why I did it. Like I said, when I pitched this idea to my friends and family, they said, what are you talking about? Because it was just the content creator industry or economy was not even set up. I mean, maybe it was at that point for YouTube, but not necessarily for Instagram. So, how did I build it? I continued to build my audience. And as I built my audience, I attracted corporate clients who said, we would love to work with you. And that's sort of how it happened. And luckily, obviously, there are all of the mom bloggers, the parenting bloggers who came before me who laid the roadwork for that. And so that was sort of how it came about. So when people ask like, oh yeah, how do you monetize your business? The majority of it comes from corporate sponsorships.
Got it. But you need the people there. So I'm sure you really had to cultivate that, like your voice and the engagement. I mean, obviously I
Exactly.
follow you and I see your engagement is already it's still, I mean, not already, it's still so high from what I can see.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And,
yeah,
I'm really hard on myself. And so I'm always like, no, it's not as good. Like, I want it here. But that's just because of my own personality and being a striver and sometimes not sitting for a second to pat myself on the back,
we all
But
do that.
I know we're
It's
hard on ourselves.
But I do want to talk to you a little bit about modern mom probs. And one of the things I love, and it's sort of within your mission statement, is that you're sort of, you want to like normalize taboo topics. And I think
Yeah.
that's what I do too. Like, that's sort of where the idea for my podcast was born. Like, I want to talk about, mental health and motherhood and like this postpartum. I always say like postpartum really isn't like that 6 weeks. It's not 6 months. Like my kids are 7 and 11 and I still feel like I'm in that postpartum period, right? Like it's
Yes.
like we
Yes.
never go back to how things were, right? So
No.
what are some taboo topics that you still feel like need to be discussed more, or stuff, like what are you out there trying to like destigmatize or anything like that?
Yeah. Yeah. When I got started on social media, very few people, and I never like to use the word never. So that's why I'm saying very few people were talking about miscarriage or infertility or infertility treatments. Before my son was born, we unfortunately struggled with all of those things. So I had 3 miscarriages, and then I had unexplained infertility, and then we had IUI, and I had never felt more alone in my life as I did back then. And yes, in Facebook was there, but like people weren't talking about that kind of stuff on
No.
Facebook. People were taking pictures of their sandwiches and their lattes and that kind of stuff, or
Yeah.
actually on Facebook they were checking in at the gym. They're like, I'm at the movie
Right.
theater, checking at the movie theater. That's what was going on in 2010 Facebook. But um when I started my account, I switched. Oh, at first, I was always laughing about very like tongue in cheek sort of first world problems for modern mom probs, and then I switched over to be able to talk about those serious topics, the more taboo topics. Like I said, as I mentioned, infertility, miscarriage. Another one that is really catching a lot of momentum now is the mental load of motherhood. My good friend Libby Ward, she has an account called Diary of an Honest Mom, absolutely like cracked open that entire conversation about that the mental load of motherhood. And Eve Rodsky too. I don't know if you're familiar
Yeah.
with. I know. Yeah, I feel like everybody knows. We all know Eve. And then she obviously cracked open that conversation as well. And so that's something that people, I feel like 10 years ago, we never would have spoken about. And
It's
and so now we talk about it so frequently.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me too, because as a mother, I was a mother 10 years ago, struggling with this, like the mental load, but I couldn't even name it for myself. Like I wasn't even able to label it, to describe what I was feeling. And then it took these incredible women to kind of make it like, I don't know, a discussion for all of us to have. And now it's something that, yes, I talk about a lot. It's something that I still don't really think is fully understood either, because I mean, like, where's the change, right? Like, because like, even I know we have to change within our own households, but like, we're still, I mean, if for most part, moms are still the default parent, and it has to be like a conscious thing, like to make that change. Like I even talk with my own girlfriends, a lot of whom are welcoming newborns this year. I was 11 years ahead of them, but they're sort of dealing with this stuff now. And it's not, stuff has changed, but like not that much has changed. Right.
Yes. No, I agree 100%. I love that you mentioned about putting words to it, because I think that was the biggest thing for me, is having a phrase, something to call it, something to call this sort of nebulous feeling that we all felt. And then if you could, attach a phrase to it, the mental load of motherhood, you go, yeah, okay, that's it. That's what we're all trying to work through right now. And so
Yeah.
even for us, like since there now is a phrase, and we start talking about it and we have these conversations. I can say that even in my own family, I'm able to mention it to my husband. He and I talk about it more. He sees more things than he otherwise may not have seen even a couple of years ago. And so it's been incredibly helpful. And I hope that everyone continues to have these conversations on both a macro level and a micro level.
Yeah. And you do have this extensive background in social media. And I'm wondering, what role does that sort of play into these kind of larger conversations? And then we also know we see a lot and we hear a lot about this like mom shaming that happens, and like, with whether it's like breastfeeding, co-sleeping. Of course, we always want to be safe, but how would you describe the current landscape of social media in this mom parenting world? And if there and also, like, how would you, if you could make any changes, like, what would be the ideal for you?
Right, right. I have such a love-hate relationship with social media because one, I love it because I've been able to meet so many wonderful people all across the country, all across the world. I have wonderful conversations like this with you and women, like I said, all over the world. And it has taught me so much. And it has made my life better because I'm able to glean these little gems from wonderful people like you and my friends online. And so it has definitely enriched my life because of my network. So I'll say that. That's my first thing. But then on the flip side, there's the darker side, like you said, of guilt and mom shaming and always feeling sort of performative. I feel like that to me is my least favorite thing of all things, which is why I hate the video so much, the video aspect of social, because I feel like that's very performative and that's not me. It's just not who I am. And so that's another thing. And then, as you mentioned, there are these like third rails essentially of parenthood that one, as a content creator, that you really shouldn't mention, or you can mention, but you're going to get flack for it. That's the co-sleeping. It's the breastfeeding. It's the, serving your kids certain foods. It's the bedtime. Sleep training is a big one. So there are certain hot button topics that I know that if I'm going to mention it, I'm going to hear an earful one way or the other. Alcohol obviously is another big one. So yeah, even if you mention alcohol, one way or the other, you're just going to hear something about it. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. But for me, I had experienced burnout for a while. It was about a year ago that I said, I don't know where I fit in anymore because video was so popular, right? And I was
Yeah.
like, that's not like really who I am. I don't want to be like dancing in front of the camera. Like that's just not it's not my bag. That's like, on social, they're always like, you have to be authentic. You have to be yourself. You have to be yourself. You're like, okay. And then you see everyone doing the same thing, or you see everyone dancing the same dance. And it's like, but that's not me. Like, that's not me being authentic
Yeah.
if I'm doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. So once I sort of like broke through that mentality and broke through that thinking, and I said, no, like really be authentic and like act how you would act in a conversation like this. Like right now you're
Right.
seeing 100% normal Tara. This is me. And I could do that on podcasts, whether it's my podcast, your podcast, like whatever it is. And so I always say that I think that we could have a better conversation in 40 minutes than you can in a 7-second reel. And I think that we could do more good for society and more real conversations in that amount of time. That's not to say that the people that are crushing it with the 7-second reels aren't still crushing it. They absolutely are. And they're super talented and they're authentic to themselves.
Right.
And so I think that's what we need to keep in mind is like, be you. If you like threads and you like writing one-liners and quippy things, then by all means do that. If you are a fashion person and you're really good with like affiliate links and you could like show a dress and everyone's going to want that dress, then yeah, do that. So I really think it's so hard when we get caught in the comparison trap. You're like, oh, but look at the success of this one girl. I want to be doing what this one girl is doing. Well, yeah, it's working for her because that's who she is and that's how she is. And you should find success in who you are and what you do.
I love that. Actually, I really think I needed to hear that because I'm sort of like sometimes I do that death scrolling, doom scrolling thing, like oh gosh, and I'm like saving audio and I'm like I should probably record this, but then yeah, when I get down to it and I'm like this doesn't feel right. So I think that I love that you're saying that because we do have to find a way that works for us, right? Like we have to be our authentic selves or it's not going to work. And one thing I
Mhm.
also wanted to ask you is because you've named some really, really incredible women out there on social media that are, in your network and your community that are friends of yours.
Mhm.
And that has been a really vital part of my journey as well. So talk to us a little bit about community. How do you cultivate those friendships? How do you maintain them? I'm gonna go on a limb and say maybe you don't live near a lot of them and it's like these are like social media friendship, virtual
Yeah.
friendships, if you will, but that doesn't mean they're any less important. So talk to us about cultivating friendships and community and how that served you.
From the beginning, I have always said that Modern Mom Probs is not the Tara Clark show. It's not about me. I've never wanted it to be about me. I've wanted it to be about the topics. That's why the account is not, Tara Clark problems. It's
Right.
modern mom problems, right? And so for me, sort of have made a switch over the last maybe let's say 2 years or so to peel back the curtain and be more of a personality of like this is Tara, not just modern mom problems.
Right.
And that's been hard for me personally. To quote my son, like it's a little cringe because it's easier for me to talk about topics or to showcase the topics. But the community has always been the thing. So my point in saying that is I always share my friends. I've always been the biggest hype person for all of my friends. My one friend, Nikki Marie, she's also on Instagram and on TikTok. She called me the ultimate hype girl. I am the ultimate hype girl. I'm always pushing everyone out front and being like, no, you take the stage, you take the limelight. Just because that's who I am. And so community, right from the very start, from the very second that I started my account, has always been tantamount to me. And my I had a very core group of friends when we first started the account back in 2016. The women lived all over the country, in fact, all over the world, because one of them was in the Netherlands. And we were best friends. We were on our chat DMing all day, every day for like years. And so these are some of my absolute best friends. And a lot of other names you said that I know people like Libby is a really good friend of mine. In fact, I've met her several times in person, one of which she had an Airbnb and she invited me and a few other friends up. Yeah, it was great in February. We were there actually for Valentine's Day and the Super Bowl this year. So we just hung out and we created content and we relaxed and it was wonderful. And so yeah, although we don't always get to see each other in person, when we do, it's just like so much more meaningful and special.
I love that. It sounds like, like really, I'd hate to sound corny, but it does kind of sound magical. Like when you get together with those girlfriends and you're all sort of aligned, like professionally and personally, it's so important. I say this all the time. I would be nowhere without my personal and professional like network. So I love that. It's really is
Yeah.
important. All right, Tara, last question. If someone's coming to Modern Mom
Yeah.
Problems, whether they're on Instagram or the podcast or even your book, like what are you hoping, who is it for? And like what are you hoping they take away from it?
It is for, I like to say millennial moms, but now like there's Gen Z moms too, right? So I can't just be like, oh, it's only millennial moms because that's not fair. Um, it is for any modern mom who wants to feel recognized and realize that she's not alone. And whether that's from a, humor standpoint or whether that's from a more serious standpoint of the conversations that we do have, like I mentioned before, um, I just want people to feel like they're not the only one going through that experience. Whether it's that their kid, doesn't want to put on their shoes and they're taking too long and now you're going to be late to school, or that you unfortunately just had a miscarriage and you think, God, I'm the only person that this has ever happened to. I just want people to know that they're not alone. And I'm so grateful that they're like in the community and that they're welcomed in the community. And I think it's super important too. I always say this also is like, I don't like to make jokes on the backs of other people. Some content creators will make jokes of like this kind of mom and that kind of mom, and it's like no, like that's not cool. I don't they could do that for themselves, but in this community I don't like to ever make jokes on the backs of other people in the way that they parent, because all of us parent differently and all of us have different lived experiences and we need to respect that.
I love it. I adore you. You're saying all the right things. All right, tell everybody where they can find you or, find the account. Give us all the information.
Yeah, absolutely. So on Instagram and actually every social media, it's Modern Mom Probs and modernmomprobs.com. What else? Listen to the podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, all the places, Modern Mom Probs. I'm big into branding, right? So like anything is going to be Modern Mom Probs.
It's got to be across the board there.
The board. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for your time. This is such an amazing conversation.
Thank you for having me.